We have a true playable character today in the sea of non-playable characters, a real treat. Mr. Sam Callahan joins us today, the lead analyst at Swan Bitcoin. If you haven't read his writings or seen him conduct interviews with other unbelievable experts in the Bitcoin sound money space, you have to check them out. Sam's one of the brightest young minds, really is one of the brightest minds in the space in general. His work, I love reading his work or watching him. He's a great speaker and just really understands the Bitcoin space at such a high level, and does a really good job, I think, bridging the gap between the younger generations and the older generations. I think he's one of the few people I look to and say, man, he really can see things from a macro, like a 100,000 foot view. I love that about him. We talk about a few things. Well, Satoshi, what's happening there with the brain drain in America and what's happening. We talk about Sam's story, again, what got him into Bitcoin, to see it as the answer we all think and know it can and should be. CBDCs, we touch on that. And we talk about his ways you can orange pill people and some of the things he does to do that, and what his definition of money is, and among a few other things we talk about. So please enjoy this. Please share this out, because the algorithm truly hates truth. And we want to share these things out over on the system so that way we can minimize collateral damage in this monetary transition. Mr. Sam Callahan, enjoy. Mr. Sam Callahan, thank you so much for giving us your time and being so generous with it. Appreciate you, and I know many Bitcoiners do, the knowledge and the breadth of knowledge you have in this arena that we all find ourselves in. So thanks for joining me today, brother.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Brandon. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and I know you do a great job, and John too, actually, on Cafe Bitcoin. You guys are filling with Alex, by the way. I didn't mention that offline, but I just was thinking of that. And you guys have, I was tell John this before too, but just as all of us do these things and content creation and getting out there and doing more, you guys have really changed over the last, I don't know, what is it, 6-9 months maybe, that you guys kind of started doing that with Alex or for him and helping out. So you guys have really changed and have elevated your game, which is cool to see too, and just kind of handling people coming in. So very, very cool to see that. But I wanted to start with some of your story just quickly for a minute or two, how you got into the Bitcoin space and kind of what led you to Swan here and what you're doing now and leading this charge.
Yeah, so my story kind of revolves around, I guess I have to go back to college. I entered college during the global financial crisis. I was in business school and I was being taught Keynesian economics, and I was very bored and I thought it was very dumb. And I kept asking questions to the professors, and they didn't like me because it just didn't make sense, and I didn't find their answers really satisfactory. And I didn't know about Austrian economics really, but my dad was a gold bug, and so he kind of just did not like banks. Like, he really didn't like banks during the global financial crisis. He knew that something was going on. He would talk about TARP, and it kind of went over my head at the time, but I just kind of took that distrust that he had of central banks as well as commercial banks, and I just said, I don't want to be a part of that. So then I switched majors into sciences, and kind of went down a different path. But I always found history and studying like financial manias and crashes really fascinating. So I really studied a lot of history, and that led me to studying central banking. And that was kind of a dark rabbit hole to go down, because I really felt like, oh, wow, this group of people basically manipulate the money, manipulate markets, and it benefits the small group of people at the expense of the majority. And it's really harmful to society, but I didn't really see a solution. I didn't really see how we could stop them. I felt like they kind of ingratiated themselves in the political system, very powerful. They control the money itself. And so I think that kind of background is what led me to kind of understand Bitcoin really fast. I came across Bitcoin. I wasn't orange pilled, really. I read an article about it, and I really became fascinated about Satoshi Nakamoto. I was just like, this is crazy. It's like a movie. And then I went down this rabbit hole, and it just never stopped. Then I was like, oh my gosh, this thing could actually, I don't think they could stop it. And I think it could actually take power away from the central banks. And then at that point, I was working as like a sports physical therapist. I was with like professional sports teams. I went down that whole path. But I was really interested in investing and studying on my free time, and I read a ton of books. And then when I found that, I was like, I have to be a part of this. Like, this is actually what, if I had known about this, like, I probably would have went down this path, but like, nothing can stop somebody from just going to pursue a new passion. And I just said, I got to be a part of this. Like, if there's one important thing that I could do with my life, it is to fix the money and take power away from central bankers. And I really felt that in my soul. I don't know what actually drives me, my love for Bitcoin or my hatred for central banks. It's very equal. And so I was like, I got to be a part of this. So then I found myself on like Bitcoin Twitter around like, this was early 2017. And I was like an Anon account, and I was there for like years, kind of, firing away tweets, whatever. And then I just got more and more passionate, just could not stop thinking about this thing. And eventually it kind of became a service to like my patients, because I would be like working with these pro athletes and starting to get there back to like full form, but my brain was just like full Bitcoin. So I was just like, I gotta just like go work at this, like whatever. And then I just like started putting out content, like a little bit of work, and that really helps you get your foot in the door if you're thinking about getting into Bitcoin. And I just showed them some blog posts, just tweets, and that got my foot in the door at Swan. And then fast forward, it's almost been 3 years now. I've been at Swan, lead analyst now, and that's what I do full time, is just teach people about Bitcoin. So I live the dream, and that's got my story. And now I'm here just teaching people about Bitcoin, and still a lot of work to do, but we're making headway, and just happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, and a couple things there. One, really quick, I guess, what kind of athletes were you working with? Professional athletes? What sport?
Hey, really quick, I want to annoy the hell out of you with a quick little break to just remind you that we have to share the signal within the noise, because the algorithm hate truth. The algorithm hates truth. So we have to do all that we can to spread the signal. The faster we do that, the quicker change comes to the world. We need to be the change we seek to be. What are we doing? What am I doing? What are you doing to build a future? Also, if you want a written version of a lot of what we do here, please go to the description and find the link to our blog, our Substack, as well as you will see many links to either the work or the companies, the places you can find all the playable characters here that we talk to and how you can connect with them. So now back to the show. Thank you.
All of them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Olympians, football, baseball.
So was that like a facility, wasn't for like an organization or like one team or something? Okay.
I was like a consultant role, honestly. It's kind of unique. I would
Interesting.
work in like the preseason with them and fly into different teams.
Wow.
And kind of teach their training staff certain strategies of how to prevent injuries from happening in the first place. So kind of came up with this algorithm where we measured athletes, and that reduced the incidence of injuries. And if you just think about like an organization, that's the most important thing, is keeping the star players on the field, both from like a performance standpoint as well as financial, to sell tickets. So they kind of found that useful. So I started kind of going to different teams, and we saw good results in terms of teams that implemented our program had lower injury rates than the teams that didn't. And now it's pretty like everyone pretty much does what we did back then, but people weren't doing it back then. And so, yeah, that's what I did before Bitcoin. And now it just seems like a whole other life. But
yeah,
it's interesting. I still find it interesting. Still have my degree and license and everything, but maybe I'll go back to it one day. I don't know.
Well, we hope so. We get hyper Bitcoinization, then you can go back to that. Well, maybe next week we'll have to dive into that deeper with you, because that's very interesting to me. I spent a lot of time on the training table growing up. Oh yeah, just different stories for another day. Like I said, next week we might have to sit down and talk about it a little bit. But it's just all kinds of crazy, just injuries and just stuff like that. So for different time. Going through all that though, what was and this is like, I feel like this is like the thing that everyone kind of goes through, and in some you're still like in it, where you're just like, I don't know what it is. And BJ Dichter's always like, it's Hamlin's razor. It's Hamlin's razor. Don't contrived malice to what is just stupidity, and just people like you kind of going on this rabbit hole and seeing the central banking and all that. Because I'm very similar to you, where it's like, I don't know if I like Bitcoin more, or if it's like the other side, the law of polarity. Like what is it more, the dislike of this or the like of that? In your perspective, is it more of just kind of, are there people in your mind that are like, they're at the top somewhere and we don't see that, and they're pulling these levers that just, it's why the average guy is just having such a tough time? Or is it, hey, this is centralized governments, and this is why the more you centralize and bigger it gets, you're just going to, dumber and dumber things happen? What are, in your studies and over the years, what have you kind of attributed that to? What have you kind of, which side have you landed on to saying, like, again, is it malice or is it just kind of mass stupidity?
You know, I think maybe there's a group of people that are kind of power hungry, for sure, these organizations, but I would probably attribute it to ignorance as well as just kind of a lack of critical thinking, a lot of group herd mentality. This is the way things are. This is how they should be. This is how they've always been. And so we just have to keep doing them, even though the system itself seems to get worse and worse for more and more people. And so I think there's a lot of ignorance in there. A lot of people that, think they're doing the right thing and think they're actually helping people and making a positive impact, but they don't think about some of the ramifications of their decisions and some of the consequences, kind of the second order effects. They say, like, for instance, these central banks, they want to create a CBDC, and their intentions, and this is what they write, is about like improving financial inclusion and improving cross-border payments, making payments cheaper. And I think they actually believe that like this is worth the risks in terms of the trade-offs of, say, privacy, or if the proposed solution that they're working on is actually going to fix the problems or not. They really believe it, but I personally don't even think that it actually will help any of the things that they say it would. So I do think it's just like kind of a lot of people, lack of critical thinking, herd thinking, thinking that they're doing the right thing, and they're kind of dumb. And then, of course, maybe the people way up on top pulling the strings, maybe there's a few of those too that are a little more malicious in nature. But I think, whole, it's probably more dumb people not thinking for themselves.
Yeah. It's just, it's the never ending debate, right? What is your quick definition? Because again, this is something that, Reed Love has an entire podcast, right? What is money? What is your quick definition when someone, asks you, or if this is, comes up, or you're really sitting back and pondering it, what is your definition of money?
Oh, wow. My definition of money is just, it allows people to kind of coordinate economic activity. It's a good in the economy, probably the most important good, that solves the quantitative wants and some of these problems. Like, this is what Sapien talks about. This is what Parker Lewis talks about. And then that certain goods act better as money given their traits. And so that's why Bitcoin, like, it's all like the fundamentals of Bitcoin in terms of the actual monetary properties that everyone has kind of heard about, the divisibility, the portability, the durability, fungibility. That's just the characteristics that make it function better as a monetary good. And the purpose of that monetary good is to coordinate economic activity. And so that's kind of how I view money. And in terms of money, it should also have the characteristic of scarcity, because you want to be able to send value over time and then over space. And so it allows you to preserve your purchasing power. And when you give up your work and your energy and skill, you should be paid in something that's able to hold value over time, and then is really effective at coordinating economic activity in society. And so that's kind of my long-winded answer of what I think money is, and why I think Bitcoin actually is the best money that we've ever had, because of those properties that underlies that's really its value, is its underlying monetary properties, that allows it to function as a superior money to anything mankind has ever seen, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. It's, I think it makes me think of two things. Like, one, it's probably and you kind of alluded to this, it's probably the first real money we've ever had, actually, first pure money. And do you think, this is a question I've been asking people lately, do you think that we will look back like 50, 100 years from now, or it could be longer, I guess, and be like, wow, like that was like the dark ages, like the 20th century, maybe early 21st century, when we think we have it so great, and you look back, and when you're on this sound money standard, when people look back and be like, wow, look at all that death or destruction, like the chaos, like do you think people might look back and think that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with anything, we kind of look at the past that way, right? Like in a lot of
True.
ways, we think, how could they survive without these amazing technologies that we have? And
So
I think
true.
in the future will be the same thing. It's actually moving exponentially as well. So I think we'll probably be looked at as the dark ages, 100, 200 years from now. I think that's
True.
very, very possible. And I think it's absolutely crazy. They'll say, "Wow, you guys use this paper money that was manipulated and could be printed by anybody." I think they'll think that was absolutely insane that we did that. So, this idea of like the fiat money experiment, where you have these free floating currencies that weren't tied to any real world value, that could be manipulated by a small group of people controlling the price of money itself. I think that is something that people will look back on and be like, that was really crazy that they did that experiment, because it was obviously not going to work. And it's crazy how long they kept that going for. And so I think that's something people will look back on.
I will we're going to touch on this in a minute, but you're, like I was saying earlier offline, your latest Swan Private Insight, you kind of touch on that, half of what you just said actually. So it was kind of my segue. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it's yeah, that's the best answer that I think I've heard, which is so simplistic, which is a lot of times the best answer, right? Where you're just like, yeah, do we do it now, right? We look back, we're like, like, what are those people thinking? Like, it's the dark ages. So, man, that's the best answer I've heard so far. Before we go into the Swan Private Insight for a second, just one or two little things I want to ask you in there. Getting into some of the current event stuff now. So Wall Satoshi, there's obviously some news the last few days, whatnot. People leaving. Obviously, we have some increasing government scrutiny, to say the least, targeting self custodial wallets, things of that nature. People holding on to their own assets, for crying out loud. How concerned are you about the potential limitations or restrictions imposed on Bitcoiners? Quite honestly, people are trying to hold their wealth. And what do you foresee some of the actions, I guess, that can be taken, or maybe it's just hodling? What is your mind telling you, I guess, over the last few days here?
Well, it's certainly concerning some of the regulatory actions. I would say were warranted against some of these entities, but some of the narratives surrounding it around illicit activity, the FinCEN proposed ruling, is very broad. There's a lot of overreach, and it's really enabled by the Bank Secrecy Act as well as the Patriot Act, which is really it's a wide net, right? So there's a lot of people that are acting within the rules of the law, but they're caught in this net of surveillance. They send a certain dollar amount. I think it's $10,000 for the Bank Secrecy Act, and that's not adjusted for inflation. It's concerning because, like Wall Satoshi, for instance, they just said we're not going to serve U.S. customers, and so it's getting harder and harder for Bitcoin businesses to take on the risk of operating in the United States when they can just go anywhere. And so we're really kind of making it harder for Bitcoin businesses to operate in this country, and it's supposed to be the land of the free. We don't know why Wall Satoshi actually did it. They didn't clarify, but I would guess it's a custodial Lightning wallet, and maybe they were, doing some kind of mixing in the back end or something. And when the FinCEN came out with this ruling, really banning any kind of mixing, maybe they were tapped on the shoulder. Maybe they had to do AML KYC laws or compliance, and they weren't willing to do that out of principle. And it doesn't really matter. Now we have one of the most popular Lightning wallets. It got really popular with Nostr, right? Started doing swaps.
Yep.
One of the most popular custodial Lightning wallets are now no longer serving U.S. customers. So it's a good thing that they can still withdraw their sats. They're not going to lose their sats or anything like that. They're not going to shotgun KYC people, which is good. At least I hope they don't do that. And but I think that's what's going on, if I had to speculate. And so it's a little concerning. I think we should expect it. I think as a Bitcoin community, you should expect every single attack vector to happen against Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin's strong enough, it's going to overcome all of those. And that's kind of like the game we're playing. They're going to try to do everything they can to kind of bend it to their will. But if you believe in Bitcoin's value proposition, that it's sufficiently decentralized, that it will continue to innovate, and more privacy solutions will come about on different layers, which is something I believe, then this is just kind of a step in the journey, I would say. And so they can try to stop it, but as we've seen with other decentralized protocols, very, very difficult to kill it.
Yeah, you brought up a great point, and it's something that I've just been thinking so much about it for really years now, in a way, which is, and it's not just a Bitcoin thing, but just kind of insurance buying time. Anytime that there's not mass chaos on the streets, at least here in America where we are, it's insurance buying time, whether it's Bitcoin or maybe it's other hard assets, or whether it's security, self-defense, things of that nature. I feel like there's this bridge we have to cross, this old rickety bridge. I think of Jurassic Park 3 for some reason. They're on like the pterodactyl cage, the pterodactyl cage. And you have to like cross the rickety bridge, and you got to do it like one by one, and everyone's got to get over to the other side. And I feel like we're edging closer and closer to that. And it just feels like, are we ready for that? Are Bitcoiners ready for that? Are people just in general ready for this transition, monetary transition? So we, feel free to touch on that, but also, are you worried about, we touched on this too, or you did, the brain drain? That's something, again, I've seen it in Detroit growing up here. Obviously, people leaving when you have terrible economic government policy, people leave. They're like, I'm gone, and they leave the city. Then they left the state of Michigan, and we're seeing it with the United States now, like you just said, right, with Walt Satoshi. That's a very real thing that I've seen personally, and it worries me for the United States. Thoughts on any of all that?
Yeah, and that's something like technology enables, right? And that's something Bitcoin enables, because now you can actually take your wealth with you as well. And this is kind of the thesis of the sovereign individual, where you're going to have basically countries competing for people, because if you can work from home, if you could take your wealth with you with 12 words in your head, you're just going to leave. If you're in a really harsh tax environment, if you're in a country that doesn't align with your values, when it comes to individual liberties, you can just get up and leave. And so I think you are seeing more of that. I think you will see more of that if you continue to see really bad policy come down on the populace. And if the country continues on this path, then you're going to see more and more people migrate to other countries that do align with their values. And so these countries are competing for like a tax base essentially right now. And if they treat their, populations right, they won't leave. But if they don't, then they can leave. At least I guess the more privileged people can. And so I think you absolutely are seeing a brain drain. I still think the United States of America is a great place to live in terms of the world. I still have faith in the values that this country was founded, and I have to believe that we can kind of get things back on track. And I think Bitcoin could be a part of that. But I do think that you are going to see, more migration if we continue to see kind of things kind of go down this certain path. And so it's about kind of redirecting things and focusing on what made this country great, in the 20th century.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In saying that, kind of transitioning a little bit to CBDC, we'll spend a minute or two on this. I know you, like I said earlier, you get hit with this a lot, so we don't need to spend tons of time on this. But sure. I don't know if it was someone, I just saw it like once or twice. I think it was earlier today, actually. But Pippa Malmgren, I don't know if it was today or right now that they're meeting, or if it was last year. I thought I saw 2022 somewhere. But again, we've seen all these videos of, hey, CBDCs, we get to control everybody, or some variation of that. We're going to see everything. We're able to track this and that, everything. Which just a few years ago, people like any of us were called conspiracy theorists, whatever. And now it's just like these people just talk about it out in the open, whatever it is, and are very open about it. George Gannon was just on Michelle McCory's show the other day on Kitco saying that, they're not going to come and just say, hey, we're because there's all these legislation in different states saying, oh, don't worry, no CBDCs. DeSantis is doing it, a bunch of people, but it's not going to come in most likely as a CBDC. It's going to be piecemeal together. It's going to be something, boiling a frog in the pot over time. How do you kind of see this in just, minute or two, kind of a global sense of where we're at in this kind of story? And are we going to be able to, I guess this is a big thing. do we survive our government? Do we outlast the government and we change government and it's maybe next year or maybe it's 4 years from now and we kind of outlast them? Or do you see us really kind of going through these steps here in America or the West? What is your grand kind of case for where we're at and where you think we're going right now?
Well, CBDCs can kind of take different, they can come in different wrappers, I guess you could say. And right now there's different countries that are taking different paths. And, right now I look at the Eurozone and they're actually going down the route of a retail CBDC, kind of what everyone envisions a CBDC is, which is like a digital form of money that's at the retail level, not the wholesale level between banks. And so that's concerning. But in the United States, there's been a lot of pushback, both at the political level as well as from the public on any idea of a central bank digital currency. Like there's actually legislation that's trying to ban a CBDC. And in order for the Fed to do something like that, they would actually have to pass some legislation to even be able to issue a CBDC. So there have to be some actual new laws passed to allow a CBDC to occur. Now, I think things can change if the current system continues to feel more and more unstable given the debt situation. Because I think if there is a situation where they're going to have to print more and they have to think about stimulus checks, maybe they attach the stimulus checks to the CBDC and say it's a more efficient way to distribute the money. It's really about control. It's really about as inflation rises, what you also see in countries is increased capital controls. And as we've seen in China, who also has the digital yuan, the CBDC is a really great way to control the populace when you can control the money at the programmable level, where you can actually put in if-then statements and restrict people from buying certain things or access and transportation. You start to realize like how much that could be a tool of control and keep people in the fiat system as inflation continues to rise. And so, because that's what they need. If they want to trap people in inflation, because if people have an escape route, then they leave that currency. And then the currency loses value even faster as more people ditch that failing currency for another alternative like Bitcoin or something else. It could be gold, it could be anything really. They want to trap people in the currency that they're trying to inflate away. So that it doesn't lead into a hyperinflationary event where everybody's dumping it all at once. And so oftentimes you do see increased capital controls with inflation, and the CBDC would be a great way to do that. Now, right now, what you're seeing more is they're taking the approach of creating a wholesale CBDC system, a multi-CBDC system is what they call it. And so they're trying to go on the route of improving cross-border payments with wholesale CBDCs between banks. But, it's easy to see how that would be a slippery slope that would basically set up the infrastructure to allow retail CBDCs to function down the road when maybe things are so bad that they can get away with passing one or kind of implementing one, or, maybe people just get used to the idea of digital money at that point, and it's just maybe not the right time to launch it. But if they have all the infrastructure in place, it makes it a lot easier for them to finally do that and push a CBDC, retail CBDC. So right now, it's like really driven by the Bank of International Settlements on a more international level, trying to improve cross-border payments with a multi-CBDC wholesale system. And the retail CBDCs, there's like a few of them, and the Eurozone is the one to watch, the digital euro, because that one's the most farthest ahead by far. But United States, not so much. Like I think we're pretty far away from a retail CBDC. I know what George Gammon's saying. Like you could like have a pseudo CBDC with like the deposits, and it actually came kind of close when the FDIC said that they'd kind of like back all deposits, and it would kind of be all backed by the Fed. It was kind of like, okay, well that would be like kind of a CBDC, but it's still not programmable. Like it wouldn't be programmable money that would be able to be turned on and off with certain stipulations. And so that's like a little technological difference. It wouldn't have that capability. And so until that happens, like that, in my mind, that's the retail CBDC where you could actually program like, hey, those people can't buy this meat there's quotas, or they can't access their money at certain times because they have mental health issues. That's another one that I read in a biz paper, that they basically were like, well, if somebody has a mental health issue, maybe we restrict their access to their money between the hours of 8 to 8, and at night they can't use their money. And immediately what you should think is like, who's deciding who has mental health issues?
Right.
Right. If I'm protesting the Federal Reserve, they're going to say those people are crazy. Let's turn off their money. So
we saw it in with China, right? The people are protesting at the bank, or they're coming to get the bank, right? And they turned all their like vax passports or health passports, like they turned them and said, "Oh, you all have COVID now," or something like that. Go home.
They couldn't access the transportation, so they couldn't congregate. That's kind of what I think about. And so it can come in different shapes, but the CBDC, it's really on the central banks themselves to try to make it successful. And I really doubt their ability to actually launch one. And I think they would have to come with a significant incentive for people to adopt it. Stimulus checks or something like that. Yeah, that could happen, but
I agree.
And maybe a lot of people will take that bait. But at the same time, it's just the same inflationary monetary policies built into a fancy wrapper with more capital controls. And while people are taking that bait, there's going to be some people using Bitcoin. And the big difference is that over time, those people's purchasing power are going to be maintained, and their other ones are going to be inflated away. And they're going to start to look at their Bitcoin neighbors and say, "Oh man, they can afford 2 cars now, and I can barely afford it on my bike." It's like what Sapien says: you can't protect yourself from somebody else using better money than you in the economy. And so more and more people, I think, will start to understand that as their purchasing power gets eroded away in the CBDC, because it's the same inflationary monetary policy.
Yeah, that contrast will be striking. I think that's a great point. Those people seeing Bitcoiners doing what they're doing. And I'll link to you and Natalie Smolinski did a great panel at Pacific Bitcoin too, talking about this very thing. And so I'll link to that too, because if people want to deep dive into it more, I think it was 30 or 40 minutes of you guys talking about things you can do and just kind of personal privacy things and stuff like that. So transitioning to that latest Swan Private Insight, a couple things. Like I said, I want to touch on 2 things. One is Bitcoin is a measuring stick, and we'll talk about Argentina briefly in a second, but Bitcoin is a measuring stick. Again, I love this analogy of obviously the 21 million. It's kind of that, Greg Foss with the 11th grade math could be I always think of the science experiment from middle school, where it's just here, it's the control in the experiment, and you can measure everything off that. And you do a great job, outlining that. It makes me think of, again, like some of these common objections when someone comes to you, though, when you're talking about measuring stick, you always get like that. Well, there's too much volatility. How could it be a store of value? Governments, they're going to ban it. What are you like? What does Sam say when someone's coming to them and say, "Hey, I just wrote this 10-minute article, or whatever it is, this multi-page article, and it's explaining it to you, and you're still telling me that you have some objection? Like it's too volatile, Sam." What do you say to people when they're your family members, obviously Thanksgiving, Christmas, all these things, people are talking about it? What do you say to people when they're giving you those objections?
Yeah, the volatility. I mean, I've gotten so used to it, and I just try to be empathetic because it is kind of hard to wrap your head around at first. The Bitcoiner me want to say like it's the most stable thing in the world. Like I know, my Bitcoin will never be debased. I know there's
right.
1 million, 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. Like that's actually where my mind is. And I was like, you guys are holding money that you don't even know what the supply is right now, and you won't know tomorrow, and you won't know. They'll just inflate, print trillions in a matter of weeks is what we saw.
People's brains lock up. They just lock up when you say that. Yeah.
Right. And you see prices kind of really fluctuating with goods and services. And to me, it shows the Bitcoin or the dollar's, volatility as it like loses value. And so it's this idea, like, that's what I would want to say. But honestly, the best thing to say with the volatility is always just kind of like zoom out, Bitcoin. I choose upward volatility over guaranteed steady declines in my purchasing power. Which is what you get with the dollar. It might feel like that's more stable, but you are guaranteed to lose value. And as we've seen, it's like a slow slope downwards with the dollar, but that slope's getting steeper and steeper as inflation is rising. And so now people are starting to feel that. They're like, "Oh wow, I can kind of actually feel that slope now of their purchasing power." But Bitcoin's is like this, but when you zoom out, obviously it goes like this, and there's an actual chance that it can go up in value, which is something that the dollar can't say. And then, the volatility, I always just say, is a function of Bitcoin's inelastic supply, and then waves of demand. And volatility itself is kind of like a good thing because it brings people into Bitcoin, brings people out, and then it actually washes out the clowns and the speculators each cycle and leaves a really hardened investor base who actually understand Bitcoin's value proposition. And I believe that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger each cycle. And so Bitcoin's volatility, as the price goes up, that number goes up, brings in a lot of people from Bitcoin. I mean, the majority. I mean, some people are idealistic and get attracted to Bitcoin, but most it's just number go up. And as you learn about it, some people lose faith and sell, and some people don't. And then you get these like kind of boomer bust cycles. And because Bitcoin supply is completely fixed, I just see these like huge waves come in and then it comes out. And so that's kind of the volatility, at least how I picture it in my head. And I think as more and more people understand Bitcoin, this is actually what we see in the data too, but the volatility drops. And as more people get Bitcoin and it becomes a greater percentage of their net worth just because of the price appreciation as it continues to get adopted, naturally they'll start to use it more in the economy as it becomes a greater percentage of their net worth. And then once you have Bitcoin for like way down the line, just once we have Bitcoin kind of functioning more from a day-to-day perspective, spending in goods and services, you should see that volatility kind of level out in my mind. So there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. I just gave you like 3, but that's kind of what I think about the volatility. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think it's a really good thing. And like I said, I'd rather choose upward volatility over guaranteed steady declines any day.
Transitioning to Argentina really quick, and don't want to spend a ton of time. I know we have about 10 minutes here. And it's not necessarily, what do you think about Milei or something like that, but it's kind of along the lines of the IMF, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is it, what are your thoughts on what the future might be with them and the IMF? Obviously, they just came out recently. I believe it was IMF. I don't think it was a World Bank. I think it was IMF, and just saying, hey, you can't use Bitcoin. They made Argentina do, take that, say, hey, you're not going to handle that and use that. And now here we are with Milei. What are your thoughts there? And then also bottom up or top down adoption? Do you whether they adopt a Bitcoin or not, or they're, hey, use any currency, it doesn't matter. Do you think it's better for bottom up adoption and the plebs and people just that groundswell, or is it the Bukele approach, or is it Milei? What are your thoughts on that?
I think I'd probably say like bottoms up is probably better because it's just like more about the individual making that decision based on their own needs. And maybe that's a little bit more stable of a way to get adopted instead of being forced upon or, the Bukele.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
In El Salvador, it's a little different. Like, it's the best is best of both worlds, right?
Right.
You're in a good environment. The Argentina, so what you were mentioning before, Argentina's relationship with the IMF is extremely contentious. I mean, it's ridiculous. And last time when they were once again defaulting on their loans and they were begging the IMF for another, I think $44 billion, part of the stipulations, because each time they go back to the IMF demands certain things to get back the money. It's usually to enrich international corporations or get a military base there, or extract their natural resources, reduce their subsidies, make them more dependent on the IMF. Part of the stipulations last time was for Argentina banks to restrict access to crypto for people. And obviously that's concerning. And I really thought it was like IMF showing their cards that they're like concerned about this thing. I thought it was kind of a interesting development. But Milei, I think you got to be really careful just to like put politicians on pedestals, especially somebody like Milei who has this big dreams, but he's taken over an economy that is just in shambles from decades and decades of terrible policies, and he has a ton of debt to deal with. And even right now, he's beholden to the IMF and lenders as they try to roll over their debt. Basically, they're asking the IMF to allow them to roll over their debt and get more money. And once again, the IMF is going to be like, okay. So it's like interesting when Milei won, the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, I think you say her name, but she like congratulated him or something, and then he was in Washington D.C. meeting with the IMF. And so what do they think of dollarization? Do they want that? Does the IMF want that? What do they think about ending the central bank? I think ultimately when you're in this much debt, you're kind of beholden to your lenders. And unfortunately, I think Milei is going to come into a lot of obstacles in terms of keeping his campaign promises, just because he's taken over this really, terrible economy. Basically, they pretty much drained their reserves. They're in triple-digit inflation. They have all this debt, and so I think 4 out of 10 Argentinians are in poverty. And I think he said, like, my primary goal right now is to avoid hyperinflation, which, I mean, they're up there. And so I just think you got to be careful, because I don't think he's like pro Bitcoin. I think the best outcome right now is maybe that he just doesn't impede it, like he doesn't restrict it, and he just kind of allows it. I don't think he's going to come out and be a Bukele and say like, hey, we're going to adopt Bitcoin and make it legal tender. I don't think you're going to hear much of that, but maybe he just allows people to have that escape hatch. But if he is trying to prevent hyperinflation, it's like what I talked about earlier. Like, you don't want people to be able to dump your pesos. This is what you saw in Turkey as well. They try to prevent people from going to gold. They try to give incentives for people to hold the local currency. So they dump the lira. They guaranteed, certain values. If you put, your bank deposits in lira, the bank basically said, "Oh, we'll cover that if it falls in value." Like, you basically lock in exchange rate if you just hold it in it, and we'll make up the difference in inflation over that time. Basically, the loss in value. And so basically, these governments try to keep people in that inflating currency. And so maybe Milei will be forced to do that if they're focused on hyperinflation. Maybe he will start to be more antagonistic towards Bitcoin because of that reason. But I just think you got to be careful and understand that there's outside forces at play, and he's going to have a really uphill battle to try to come through. Now, he said that ending the central bank is non-negotiable, so we'll see. It's a very interesting. Interesting development. I'm going to follow it. I'm not that hopeful, but like I said, maybe at least we can expect maybe he'll not put his foot on the throat of Bitcoin in that country, because the people need it. Like, I think the people need access to it, and maybe we'll see him dollarize. I think that's probably the more logical. And then at that point, it'd be like stable coins, I think, would be really popular, because there's no more easier way to get access to dollars than stable coins right now. So I think you'd see like increased adoption of stable coins before Bitcoin. And that's already, you're seeing that. You're seeing they want that perceived stability of the dollar, and you kind of sympathize with it a little bit if they have bills to pay every month. But I think that's the more logical expectation that I have for what's going on in Argentina.
Yeah, well said. It's, to me, it's almost like the politicians, like you said, I'm of the groundswell nature. It's got to be from the bottom up, and then you force politicians to change, which is, I believe, as well the best way to do it. And it's almost a Streisand effect, where it's like you want the politicians, because a lot of people still believe in them as the leaders and whatever they're doing and look to them. So it's the Streisand effect to me. It's like, hey, as much as we can get politicians to say the word Bitcoin or sound money, the better. And I feel like that's the win almost, if anything. I know we have a couple of minutes left here.
Yeah, sure.
So rapid fire, a couple just ending things. What's the big project you're working on right now that's kind of got you jazzed up? Anything big you're working on, whether it's content or the business stuff, Swan? What are you guys kind of working on? Or like anything you can speak to, I guess, at least, that you're working on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I focus more on the content side of things. So each time I just I have what I'm writing about every 2 weeks or every month. When I do the podcast. So I'm really jacked up on the podcast because I just like talking to good guests. So we have some good shows lined up. We're trying to get more like traditional financial people on there that might not be as receptive to Bitcoin, trying to build those bridges.
That's cool.
And educate them.
That's cool.
And so like I had a fellow from a former Bridgewater guy on the last show, and he's very skeptical of Bitcoin, but we had a very good conversation. You know, we can have a civil conversation and disagree on the show. So I'm just excited to kind of get out of the echo chamber a little bit and try to build bridges and teach people about Bitcoin, specifically really smart people who just might not have done the work and understood it and just kind of see it as more of a speculative asset than something that could maybe be the future of the monetary system is how I see it. But so I'm excited about that. I'm writing a piece on Argentina. Right now, it's a deep dive into the history because I think it's fascinating. Like we touched a little bit about its history with the IMF, but it's just interesting to me that it was one of the most prosperous nations in the world in the early 20th century, like up there with the United States. And you just saw a completely divergent path, like, and how did that happen? And so that's what I'm kind of writing about. How did it get from most prosperous nation to triple digit inflation and Milei, and trying to kind of paint that picture, that timeline for people of how it got there. And so I'm excited about that. That's what I've been kind of working on this week. And Swan's just doing well, just part of that machine now. And we put out some good products like the Swan Vault, which I'm excited about, like a multi-sig solution. Swan IRA, helping people kind of get it into retirement accounts, is exciting. So yeah, man, just doing my thing, doing the Bitcoin thing.
I love it. Last thing, where can people find you, number one, and what's the best way, quick 20-second, 30-second to when someone orange pilled, you kind of converted them. What's the best way when they're like, hey, I'm on the mission now, Sam? Like, what's the best way you've kind of found to get them, hey, go in this direction and, start evangelizing this way?
Yeah. Well, you can find me on Twitter. That's where I'm at most of the time. So at Sam Callahan, SamCallah. I'm also, a lot of my stuff is posted on the Swan blog. So you can just go to swan.com and then click on the Learn tab, and then you can see a lot of my articles. And then in terms of like, so you mean like they get orange pilled, and then how can they help orange pill people?
Yep.
To me, it's just like having honest conversations, not coming off too strong. I think Bitcoiners learn about Bitcoin and it clicks, and then they go, oh my God, I gotta tell everyone about this. But right now specifically, you just hear like inflation, oh my gosh, the grocery prices, and just kind of like meet them where they are and just be like, well, did you know, like, inflation doesn't have to happen, right? Like this is money that's controlled and they printed trillions of dollars, and just teach them some of these basics of why the money is broken before you even get into Bitcoin. I think that really helps people understand. Like I said, like I studied the problem of central banking, which allowed me to click with Bitcoin really fast. And so focus on the problem, because everyone feels the problem right now. And there's a lot of people out there that are wondering why they feel like they just aren't getting ahead. And they're kind of like, don't even know where to think why this is happening. It's just kind of, they just assume inflation is this natural phenomenon or something. But it's important to kind of meet them there. And a lot of people are there. A lot of people don't understand the problem. So you got to go back, like, because you can't understand the solution without understanding the problem. So I always say, like, just understand your audience, focus on the problem, and then kindly address the common FUD, but you always hear. And so just study so that you really got those talking points down, because you will hear them every single time. Bitcoin's bad for the environment. Bitcoin's too volatile. Government will ban Bitcoin. All these things. Just understand how to answer those questions and understand how to do it well. And as you keep doing that, you're going to get better and better, just like sharpening your sword, if you will. And so that's how I would evangelize.
So cool. Well, you're a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate you. I know so many people in the Bitcoin space appreciate you, Sam. And just thank you for being generous with your time today. And I look forward to seeing you soon, brother.
Good, man. Yeah, great job with the podcast too. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Sam.
Whew, I told you that was gonna be a good one. Sam is so brilliant, so smart. Just thank him for his time. He's so generous, and I can't wait to hopefully have him on again, maybe in a few months, talking about the different progress that has been made. Fortunately or unfortunately, with CBDCs, what's going on there. He's always so brilliant when it comes to that. And any other news or new topics that are coming out. Obviously, election He mentioned, he's writing some stuff on Argentina, what's happening there. And again, maybe some more tips on how we can orange pill people, those around us, family, friends, and push the sound money culture forward and really spreading this throughout the world so we can minimize collateral damage and we can shift from this old legacy monetary sinking fiat Titanic to the new Bitcoin world of deflation and higher standards of living and lower prices for everybody. So no one better than Sam. So hopefully we can have him back at some point soon. You can catch him at Swan Bitcoin, obviously the lead analyst there, and go follow him, go check him out. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Please share this out, like I said, because the algorithm hates truth. Trust but verify. Question everything with boldness, even the existence of God himself. And this is not financial advice. It is freedom advice. And we will see you on the next one.